The world doesn't reward the loudest person in the room. It doesn't reward the most agreeable, the most available, the most apologetic, the most endlessly explaining, constantly justifying, perpetually oversharing person who has spent years making themselves smaller so that others could feel more comfortable. That's not virtue. That's not kindness. That's not even politeness. That's slow self-destruction with a smile on your face. And here's the brutal truth that nobody in your life is going to tell you directly. The habits that are costing you the most, the ones quietly bleeding your power, your peace, and your self-respect every single day, are not the dramatic ones. They're not the obvious vices. They're not the behaviors you already know you need to stop. They're the ones you've been told are good, the ones you've been praised for, the ones that got you approval when you were young and now run on autopilot in your adult life, while the cost accumulates in the background like a debt you didn't know you were taking on. Most people never identify them. They just feel vaguely drained, vaguely resentful, vaguely like the life they're living is slightly less than the one they were meant for, without ever being able to name exactly why. While others keep performing these habits and wondering why they feel exhausted, you're about to understand exactly what they are. While they keep explaining themselves to people who never asked, you'll know why that costs them. While they keep complaining and people-pleasing and shrinking, you'll have the specific Stoic framework to stop doing all of it. Most people are unconsciously bleeding. You're about to learn how to stop the wounds. But before we go deep, let me be clear about something. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about becoming selfish or indifferent or difficult. The Stoics were not harsh people. They were free people. And freedom, real freedom, sometimes requires the courage to stop doing things that everyone around you is still doing. Things that look like virtues but function like chains. Today you'll discover the 8 habits that are silently costing you everything, and the Stoic principles that will give you the clarity and the courage to cut them permanently. Now drop this in the comments before we go further. Write this: I stop performing. I start living. Let's go. Number 1, stop complaining. Complaining feels like power. That's why most people can't stop doing it. When you complain about your circumstances, your relationships, your work, the weather, the traffic, the people who don't understand you, there is a momentary feeling of relief, a temporary sense of control, as if naming the problem gives you authority over it. It doesn't. Machiavelli once said, "The one who adapts his policy to the times prospers, and likewise the one whose policy clashes with the demands of the times does not." Complaining is the opposite of adaptation. It is the announcement that the world has failed to conform to your preferences, and the implicit demand that it should. And the world, as you have probably noticed, does not respond to that demand. Here's what complaining actually does that most people never examine. It trains your brain. Every time you voice a complaint, you are not releasing tension. You are reinforcing a neural pathway that says, when reality does not match my expectations, the appropriate response is to narrate my displeasure. The more you do it, the faster that pathway fires. The faster it fires, the more automatically and more frequently you complain. And the more you complain, the less you tolerate. The less you tolerate, the more you complain. That is not relief. That is a loop. And it is the loop that most chronically unhappy people are trapped inside without ever realizing that the trap is made of their own words. The Stoics understood this with extraordinary precision. Epictetus, who was born into slavery, who was physically abused, who had less control over his external circumstances than almost any human being in the ancient world, never complained. Not because his circumstances weren't genuinely difficult, but because he understood that the energy spent narrating what was wrong was energy stolen from the only question that mattered. What can I do about it? Think about the last time you complained about something at length. Replaying a frustrating conversation, detailing everything wrong with the situation to someone who couldn't change it, cataloging the failures of a person who wasn't in the room. How much energy did that take? How much time? And what changed as a result of that expenditure? Almost certainly nothing, except that you felt slightly worse afterward than you did before. Because complaining, whatever temporary relief it promises, always leaves a residue, a film of helplessness, a subtle reinforcement of the belief that the problem is out there, beyond you, beyond your influence, beyond your power to address. Here's where this gets really powerful. Smart people, people who have genuinely mastered their inner lives, have a completely different response to the same circumstances that trigger complaints in most people, not because their circumstances are better, because their question is different. Most people ask, why is this happening to me? Smart people ask, what is this asking of me? That single shift changes the entire neurological response to adversity. It moves the locus of attention from the problem to the response, from the external to the internal, from the realm of things outside your control to the only realm where your power actually lives. One practical technique is the complaint audit. For 3 days, every time you feel the impulse to complain, to anyone in any medium, out loud or in writing, pause and ask yourself, is this complaint followed by a plan? If there is a genuine action you can take, take it. If there is not, the complaint is not information. It is noise. And noise is something you can choose to stop generating. But here's the warning. Cutting out complaining does not mean performing positivity. It does not mean pretending problems don't exist or suppressing legitimate concerns. The Stoic practice is not toxic optimism. It is honest realism combined with the fierce direction of energy toward what can actually be changed. Remember, complaining is not communication. It is the announcement of helplessness dressed up as honesty. Stop making that announcement. Start asking the only question that has an answer. Number 2, stop over-explaining yourself. You don't owe anyone a dissertation on your choices, but you've been trained to think you do. You've been trained to justify, to elaborate, to provide so much context and backstory and preemptive defense that by the time you've finished explaining, you've talked yourself out of your own authority and handed it to whoever was listening. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Most people appear to be someone who needs permission, someone whose choices are always up for review, someone who is not quite sure of their own decisions until enough people have approved of them. And they create that appearance not through weakness of character, but through the habit of over-explanation, which signals, in every syllable, that they are not completely sure they have the right to decide for themselves. Here's what over-explaining actually communicates that most people never consciously register. When you over-explain, you are not being thorough, you are being anxious. You are attempting to preempt criticism by providing so much justification that there is no gap for objection. But here's what the person receiving the explanation actually hears. They hear someone who is not sure of themselves, someone who believes their choices require external validation to become legitimate, someone who gives their power away before anyone even asks for it. Think about the people in your life whose decisions you most respect. They do not explain at length. They do not justify. They say what they are doing. Occasionally they say why if the context genuinely requires it, and then they act. The brevity of their explanation is itself a form of authority. It communicates that the decision has been made, that it is sound, and that external approval is welcome but not required. That is what your over-explanations are eroding, one nervous paragraph at a time. The Stoic principle behind this is the dichotomy of control. Your choices, your values, your decisions, these are yours. They live entirely within the domain of what Epictetus called the things in our power. Other people's opinions of those choices live entirely in the domain of things not in our power. When you over-explain, you are attempting to manage something that is categorically outside your influence. You are trying to control how someone else thinks about your decision. And the energy you spend on that attempt is energy directly subtracted from the quality of the decision itself. Here's where it gets really powerful. The less you explain, the more weight your words carry. This is counterintuitive. We think that more explanation creates more credibility. In reality, the opposite is true. Rare words are valuable. Common words are cheap. The person who speaks seldom but deliberately creates an expectation of significance in everyone who listens. The person who fills every silence with justification teaches everyone around them that their words can be safely ignored. One practical technique is the single-sentence rule. When you feel the impulse to explain a decision at length, give it one sentence, one clear, confident, complete sentence. Then stop. If more information is genuinely required, it will be requested. If it is not requested, it was not required. And the silence you leave where the over-explanation used to be will communicate something far more powerful than any explanation ever could. But here's the warning. There is a difference between confident brevity and arrogant dismissiveness. The goal is not to become curt or inaccessible. It is to communicate from a place of settled authority rather than anxious justification. The tone of one sentence delivered with genuine confidence carries more persuasive weight than 5 minutes of elaborate explanation delivered from a place of insecurity. Remember, your choices do not need to be defended, they need to be made. Stop defending, start deciding. Number 3, stop people-pleasing. This one is going to be uncomfortable, because people-pleasing is the habit that most people are most proud of disguising as virtue. It looks like kindness, it feels like consideration. It gets praised as being easygoing, flexible, low maintenance, generous. The people-pleaser is often the person who gets the most approval in any social group, right up until they break, which they always do. Because there is a finite amount of yourself that you can give away before there is nothing left. Machiavelli wrote, "Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved." He was not talking about cruelty. He was talking about the complete impossibility of building anything stable on the foundation of other people's approval. Because approval is the most conditional resource in existence. It is given when you behave as expected, and withdrawn the moment you do not. The person who has built their entire sense of self on maintaining that approval has given every single person in their life a switch that controls their mood, their decisions, and their identity. That is not kindness. That is hostage-taking with a smile. Here's what most people-pleasers never examine. The please is not about the other person. It is about the avoidance of your own discomfort. When you say yes when you mean no, you are not being generous. You are paying a toll, surrendering your authentic response, to avoid the discomfort of potential disapproval, conflict, or rejection. The cost of that toll is your integrity, paid once it barely registers. Paid daily for years, it hollows you from the inside, until the person you recognize in the mirror is a collection of other people's preferences wearing your face. Think about the people in your life who command the most genuine respect, not the most approval respect. They say no clearly and without elaborate apology. They set boundaries and maintain them without drama. They disappoint people when their values require it. And somehow, paradoxically, the people who will say no command more genuine respect than the people who will say yes to everything. Because yes from someone who never says no is worth nothing. Yes from someone who regularly says no is the most valuable currency in any relationship. The Stoic principle here is what Seneca called the integrity of the will, the alignment between your values and your actions. People-pleasing is the systematic violation of that alignment. The daily practice of acting against your genuine preferences in service of managing other people's emotional states. And Seneca was mercilessly clear about the cost of that practice. He wrote, "It is not that I am brave, but that I know what is not worth fearing." The person who has stopped needing everyone's approval has discovered the same freedom. Here's where this gets really powerful. When you stop people-pleasing, you do not lose relationships. You lose the relationships that only existed because you were performing a version of yourself that wasn't real. And you discover, often very quickly, that the relationships built on your authentic self are deeper, more stable, and more genuinely nourishing than any relationship that required your constant performance ever was. One practical technique is the 24-hour pause. Before agreeing to any request that activates the people-pleasing impulse, before you feel the rush of relief that comes from saying yes, before you've even thought about whether you mean it, pause for 24 hours. Ask yourself 2 questions. Do I genuinely want to do this? And if I didn't, would I still say yes? If the answer to the second question is yes, you have found a people-pleasing moment. The response to that moment is not a dramatic refusal. It is a simple, calm, unjustified no. But here's the warning. Cutting out people-pleasing is not the same as becoming indifferent to others. The goal is not to stop caring what people think entirely. Some feedback matters enormously. The goal is to care about the right things, to distinguish between genuine relationships that deserve your authentic self and the performance of approval-seeking that serves no one. Remember, saying yes to everything is not generosity. It is the avoidance of courage. Stop avoiding, start choosing. Number 4, stop seeking validation before every decision. Smart people know something about validation that most people spend their entire lives getting wrong. Validation is not information. It is comfort. And comfort, when sought before a decision rather than after it, does not improve the decision. It delays it, dilutes it, slowly transfers the ownership of it from you to whoever you sought the validation from. Machiavelli wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." He understood that decisions made from the need for approval are decisions made for other people's purposes, not your own. And decisions made for other people's purposes will always feel like someone else's life when you are living them. Most people do not make decisions. They build cases. They consult broadly, gather opinions, test the idea on multiple people, calibrate their own position based on the reactions they receive. And by the time they have assembled enough external support to feel safe moving forward, they have transferred so much ownership of the decision to others that it no longer feels like theirs. When it succeeds, the credit disperses. When it fails, the blame comes back to you alone. That is not wisdom. That is the strategic outsourcing of courage. Here's what validation seeking actually communicates to your own psychology that most people never consciously register. Every time you seek validation before acting, you send a message to your own nervous system that you cannot be trusted. that your judgment alone is insufficient, that you require external confirmation before your own perceptions can be believed. That signal, received repeatedly over time, compounds into a bone-deep insecurity that no amount of external validation can ever fix. Because the more validation you receive, the more your brain learns that validation is required, and the more it needs the next time. The cure is not more validation. The cure is fewer validations asked for. Think about the decisions you have made in your life that you are most proud of, the ones that feel most genuinely yours. I would be willing to bet that most of them were made with limited external consultation, made on the basis of what you knew in your own gut to be right, despite uncertainty, despite possible disapproval, despite the discomfort of not knowing what others would think. Those decisions feel like yours because they were. They belong to you from the moment of making to the moment of outcome. That ownership, that radical personal responsibility for a choice that was genuinely and entirely yours, is one of the most powerfully self-respecting experiences available to a human being. One practical technique is the solitude decision. For any decision that is activating the validation-seeking impulse, before consulting anyone, sit alone for 30 minutes and write down what you actually think. Not what you think people will approve of, not what seems safest. What you genuinely believe is right based on your own values and your own assessment of the situation. Then make the decision. Then, if you choose, consult others. But the decision has already been made internally, authentically yours. The external input refines the execution. It does not determine the direction. Here's the warning. This does not mean never consulting others. Smart counsel matters enormously. The distinction is between seeking perspective, genuinely useful information you do not have, and seeking permission, emotional comfort before a decision you have already made internally, but do not yet trust yourself to act on. Remember, the only validation that builds self-trust is the validation of your own judgment. Stop outsourcing it. Start owning it. Number 5, stop over-apologizing. You are sorry. You are very sorry. You are so very deeply sorry for existing in spaces, taking up time, having needs, expressing opinions, asking questions, and occasionally being imperfect. This has to stop. Not because apologizing is wrong. Genuine apology, owning a genuine mistake with clarity and without drama, is one of the most powerful expressions of integrity available to a human being. But that is not what most people are doing when they over-apologize. What they are doing is using the language of contrition as a social lubricant, a reflexive signal of non-threat, non-conflict, non-imposition, that over time erodes their authority more completely than almost any other habit on this list. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are." When you over-apologize, you are training everyone around you in exactly what you appear to be. Someone who is not quite sure they have the right to take up space. Someone whose default posture toward the world is one of preemptive guilt. Someone who apologizes for bothering people by simply being present. And once people have that image of you, once it is lodged in how they perceive your identity, it requires significant and consistent effort to dislodge. Here's what over-apologizing does neurologically that most people never examine. Every unnecessary apology releases a small dose of the same biochemistry as actual guilt. Over time, repeated unnecessary apologies train your nervous system to associate normal human behavior. Asking for things, declining things, having preferences, making requests, with the emotional signature of wrongdoing. The result is a person who feels vaguely guilty for existing in any space and taking any action that might inconvenience anyone. That is not humility. That is a neurological prison built out of the word sorry. Think about the people whose authority you most naturally respect. They apologize when they are wrong. They apologize clearly, specifically, and without excess drama. And then they stop apologizing. They do not apologize for asking a question, for taking a moment to think, for declining an invitation, for having an opinion that differs from the group, for any of the 1,000 normal human acts that over-apologizers reflexively cushion with sorry. And the absence of those unnecessary apologies is not read as arrogance. It is read as confidence, as someone who has made their peace with the space they occupy and the effect they have on the world. One practical technique is the thank you substitution. In many situations where you would reflexively apologize, you can substitute a genuine thank you. Instead of "sorry I'm late, thank you for waiting." Instead of "sorry to bother you, thank you for your time." Instead of "sorry, I know this is a lot to ask, I appreciate your help with this." The substitution removes the self-flagellation while preserving and actually enhancing the warmth of the interaction. And over time, it rewires the reflexive apology loop by providing an alternative neural pathway that does not carry the same self-diminishing charge. But here's the warning. None of this means avoiding accountability. When you have genuinely done something wrong, when your action has genuinely harmed someone or violated your own values, a clear, direct, unhesitating apology is among the most powerful things you can do. The goal is not to stop apologizing. It is to make your apologies mean something again by reserving them for the moments that actually warrant them. Remember, sorry is not a filler word. It is a declaration of wrongdoing. Use it only when you have actually done wrong, and stop apologizing for being exactly who you are. Number 6. Stop arguing with people who don't want to be convinced. This is the habit that steals more time and energy from strategically intelligent people than almost any other on this list. Because it looks productive, it feels righteous, it has all the energy of something important happening, and it produces absolutely nothing except the consumption of your attention, your composure, and your time. Machiavelli wrote, "Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception." He meant something broader than dishonesty. He meant that the direct application of force, whether physical or rhetorical, is almost never the most efficient path to the outcome you actually want. Most arguments are not about truth. That is the thing that smart people eventually understand, and most people never do. Most arguments are about identity. The person you are arguing with is not holding their position because of the evidence. They are holding it because it is part of who they are. Because being wrong about this particular thing would require a revision not just of their opinion, but of their self-concept. And that revision, the genuine updating of a deeply held identity-based belief, cannot be forced by the presentation of better arguments. It can only happen internally, privately, at the pace the person chooses. Which means that every minute you spend attempting to win an argument with someone who has already decided not to be convinced is a minute you have donated to a cause that cannot succeed. Here's what happens in the mind of someone who is being argued into a corner that most people never register from the outside. The harder you push, the harder they resist. Not because they are stupid or unreasonable, but because the human brain treats a direct challenge to a deeply held belief with the same neurological response as a physical threat. The stress response fires, the defensive circuitry activates, and from that activated state, no new information, however accurate, however well presented, can penetrate. The argument is over before it has begun. Think about the last time you changed a genuinely important belief of yours because someone argued you into it. Really think. Almost certainly, the belief changed not in the middle of the argument, but later, privately, at your own pace. When the emotional charge of the confrontation had dissipated, and you were able to examine the new information without the defensive circuitry firing. That is how beliefs actually change in human beings. Not through force, through time and space and the gradual absorption of information delivered without the threat of defeat. Smart people understand this. They do not argue to win. They plant seeds and leave. They make the observation once, clearly, with precision and without heat, and then they leave it. The seed either finds soil or it does not. Either way, they have spent 30 seconds rather than 30 minutes on the same outcome. One practical technique is the single statement rule. When you feel the pull of an argument, when you are in a conversation with someone holding a position you believe is genuinely wrong, state your view once, clearly, briefly, specifically. Then do not repeat it. Do not elaborate. Do not respond to the counter-argument with another argument. The information has been delivered. What happens to it is now outside your control. And what is outside your control, as Epictetus was unambiguous about, is not worth your energy. Here's the warning. This is not the same as never disagreeing. There are situations where the argument must be made, where the stakes are high enough and the audience receptive enough that the investment of energy is genuinely warranted. Know those situations. Reserve your full rhetorical capacity for them, and let the rest go. Remember, you cannot argue someone into wisdom they are not yet ready for. Plant the seed, walk away. Let the truth do its own work. Number 7. Stop shrinking to make other people comfortable. There is a specific kind of social training that most people received, and almost nobody ever names directly. It happened in classrooms and family dinners and social groups. It was delivered not through explicit instruction, but through 1,000 small signals, looks, silences, subject changes, the subtle withdrawal of warmth that communicated a consistent message. Don't be too much. Don't be too confident, too certain, too successful in a way that makes others feel less so. Don't take up too much space. Don't have too strong an opinion. Don't be so good at something that you make the people around you uncomfortable with the comparison. And so you learn to shrink. Not completely, not in every area, but in the specific areas where your fullness threatened the comfort of others. You learn to make yourself smaller, to dim the signal, to qualify the achievement, to deflect the compliment, to add enough hesitation to your certainty that it didn't feel like a challenge to anyone. Machiavelli wrote, "Never was anything great achieved without danger." And what he meant by danger was not just external risk, but the internal risk of being fully yourself in a world that constantly pressures you to be less. Here's what shrinking actually costs that most people never calculate. Every time you make yourself smaller to make someone else more comfortable, you are practicing a version of yourself that is less than what you are. And practice, as Aristotle understood, is formative. We become what we repeatedly do. Shrink often enough and you stop experiencing the shrinking as a choice. It becomes your default size. The full version of you, the one with the unqualified opinion and the unhedged confidence and the unhesitating presence, starts to feel not like your real self, but like an imposition. Think about the last time you had a genuine insight in a group setting and softened it before speaking. Added a maybe or an I might be wrong or a this is probably obvious. Not because you doubted the insight, because you sensed that the unqualified version of it might make someone in the room feel less than. How many of those moments have there been? How many insights softened? How many achievements downplayed? How many genuine moments of your full capacity quietly dialed back so that the people around you could feel more at ease with themselves? That is not kindness. That is the slow surrender of everything that makes you specifically valuable. The Stoic position on this is unambiguous. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Applied here, the discomfort your full presence creates in others is not your problem to solve. It is their opportunity for growth. And by shrinking to spare them that discomfort, you are not helping them. You are depriving them of the productive friction that genuine growth requires. One practical technique is the unqualified statement. For 1 week, when you have a view, a genuine, considered, confident view, state it without qualifiers. No maybe, no I could be wrong, no this might just be me. State it clearly, own it fully, and let the room respond however it responds. Notice what happens. Notice how differently people treat a statement delivered with full ownership compared to the same statement delivered from a place of preemptive apology. Here's the warning. Confidence without humility is arrogance. The goal is not to become someone who is never uncertain, never open to correction, never willing to learn from others. The goal is to distinguish between genuine uncertainty, which deserves a qualifier, and the social performance of uncertainty designed to protect other people's comfort at the expense of your own truth. Remember, your full presence is not an imposition. It is your contribution. Stop withholding it. Number 8. Stop tolerating what you should be eliminating. This is the final habit, and it is the one that underlies all the others. Every habit on this list exists and persists because somewhere in your life, in the environments and relationships and routines you inhabit, there is a tolerance for it. A context in which complaining is acceptable, where over-apologizing is expected, where people-pleasing is rewarded, where shrinking is the default. Tolerance is not neutrality. Tolerance is permission. And what you permit, you promote. Not just in others, in yourself. The environment that tolerates your worst patterns is the environment that makes them stronger. Every day you spend in a context that normalizes these habits is a day of reinforcement rather than growth. Machiavelli wrote, "Men should be either treated generously or destroyed because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones they cannot." He was describing the cost of half measures, of partial action, of the kind of tolerance that is too much to be called elimination and too little to be called acceptance. Half tolerance is the most expensive position available. It costs you the peace of genuine acceptance and the freedom of genuine change simultaneously. Here's what tolerating what should be eliminated actually does to you over time, that most people never name directly. Every instance of tolerating something you know is wrong, every relationship where the boundary is repeatedly violated and you do not enforce it, every environment where your values are consistently contradicted and you remain, every habit you know is costing you and you keep making space for, sends a message to your own self-concept. It says, I do not respect myself enough to remove what is harming me. That message, received repeatedly, compounds into a settled belief about your own worth that no amount of affirmation can counter because it is being disproved by your own daily behavior. The Stoic position is radical and it is simple. If it is not right, remove it. Not negotiate with it. Not reduce it. Not tolerate it at slightly lower levels. Remove it. Seneca wrote with his characteristic directness, "Cease to hope and you will cease to fear." He was speaking of the attachment to uncertain outcomes. But the principle applies here. Cease to tolerate, and you will cease to be diminished by what you are tolerating. Think about one thing in your current life, one relationship, one environment, one recurring pattern that you know is not right, and that you have been tolerating rather than addressing. The reason you have been tolerating it is almost certainly not because you lack the insight to see the problem. It is because elimination is costly. It requires a conflict you would rather avoid, a discomfort you would rather not feel, a change that will be temporarily harder than the familiar wrongness of the current situation. The Stoic response to that cost is direct. Short-term discomfort is the price of long-term integrity, and long-term integrity is worth more than any short-term comfort that tolerating your diminishment has ever purchased. One practical technique is the elimination audit. Take a single afternoon. Write down every person, environment, habit, and pattern in your life that you are currently tolerating rather than genuinely accepting or genuinely eliminating. For each one, ask 2 questions. Is this something I can genuinely accept, meaning I can make full peace with it, remove the resentment, and let it exist without it costing me anything? If yes, accept it fully. If no, if the honest answer is that it costs you something every single time you encounter it, and you have been tolerating it only to avoid the discomfort of elimination, then name the elimination. Name what it would require. Name when you will begin. Here's the warning. Elimination is not always possible overnight. Some things must be eliminated gradually. The goal is not instant action on everything. The goal is honest clarity about what belongs in your life and what does not. That clarity, once achieved, makes gradual elimination feel like freedom rather than loss. Remember, what you tolerate, you teach. Teach yourself that you will not endure what diminishes you. That lesson, lived consistently, is the foundation of every other change on this list. You have just learned the 8 habits that are silently costing you everything. But here is the truth that separates those who change from those who don't. Knowledge without action is the most expensive thing in the world, because it gives you the discomfort of awareness without the relief of change. You know the problem, you feel its weight, and yet nothing is different. So here is what I want you to do. Pick one habit from this list, the one that landed hardest, the one you recognized most immediately and most uncomfortably in yourself. Not all 8. 1. For the next 7 days, work on that one habit specifically. Notice when it activates. Pause before you act on it. Apply the practical technique for that habit once a day. Don't try to become a different person overnight. Become slightly more intentional about one pattern. That is enough. That is more than enough. Because intentionality compounds. One change pattern, practice for 7 days, creates the neurological and psychological foundation for the next. But remember what we said at the beginning. This is not about becoming cold or difficult or closed. The Stoics were not those things. They were free. And freedom, real freedom, sometimes requires the courage to stop doing things that everyone around you is still doing. Things that drain you, things that diminish you, things that feel like virtue but function like chains. The most dangerous person in any room is the one who has cut every habit that was leaking their power. The most valuable person in any room is the one who uses that reclaimed power to build something that makes everyone's life better. Which one are you choosing to become? If this changed how you see yourself and the habits that have been costing you, hit that like button now. If you want more content on the psychology of power, discipline, and the Stoic principles that actually change lives, subscribe and ring the notification bell. Drop a comment telling me which of these 8 habits you are cutting first. And tell me, which one surprised you the most? Until next time, stay strategic, stay disciplined, stay free.